Let me welcome our guest, Clyde Loakes. He is City Councillor of the District of Waltham Forest in London. Welcome. Silvia Casorrán from the Neighbourhood Association Poblenou, Barcelona. And a cordial welcome also goes to Martin Hikel. He is the district mayor of Berlin-Neukölln. And there's also Daniel Zöhler. He is the councillor of the city of Bocholt in charge of construction, and Jennifer Toole, president of Toole Design Maryland, USA. Welcome to all of you. Silvia Casorrán, first question is to you. What would you recommend to a city that wants to implement the superblock concept? What are the first and the most important steps in order to get going from a citizen initiative point of view?
Yes, sorry?
Yes. Everything is fine. You can
I'm confused. Okay, between German and English. Okay, no, it's very important. I mean, of course, all the changes, people don't like changes. So anything you're going to change in public space is going to get people against. Also, still the car lobbies are very powerful. So they will do anything to avoid this taking back space for people. It's very useful when you get people, citizens that are in favor of this battle for public space. For instance, now in Barcelona, it's very clear that people are claiming for more public spaces, for pedestrians and for living areas. So we need political commitment, of course, and we also need citizenship engagement to help them to go through.
Die nächste Frage geht an Clyde.
Next question to Clyde Loakes. So which initiatives in Waltham Forest brought about the fastest success? What can you tell us about that? Which one were the most successful in terms of time?
The quickest schemes have been where we've introduced the modal filters, really delivering what's been delivered in Barcelona, where you take out so much through traffic. You just prioritise those neighbourhoods for those people that live in it from a perspective of a motor vehicle access, but you transform the space. And those pictures from Barcelona are fascinating and absolutely awesome. And we have very similar pictures. I just didn't have the time to show them to you today, of how children, young people, adults are all reclaiming that road space. They're reclaiming it to play. They're reclaiming it to socialise. They're reclaiming it for biodiversity. You know, it's an amazing thing that we can do, but change is difficult for anyone, especially when they've been wedded to a certain way of life, where the car has been at the heart of that life for so many years. But what we've done, through all of your speakers today, is prove that it can be done and can be done successfully, and that becomes in the blueprint for taking us forward. But the modal filters, taking out the rat running through traffic is absolutely crucial. It's the simplest thing to do, probably the most difficult politically thing to do, but delivers and demonstrates the political intent and delivers the results very quickly.
Hikel, warum setzen Sie in Berlin
Mr. Hikel, why do you also focus that much on modal filters in Berlin-Neukölln in order to calm the streets? So the advantage is, and now the sound is gone again, that there is a guidance of traffic. So actually many cars should, it's not the objective that cars use streets going by, but the filters, they should make sure that pedestrians and cyclists can go through, but not car traffic. And this is very important to make it attractive also for cyclists to use the infrastructure, to use their cycles, and also to make them feel safe and to increase the acceptance of bicycles as a safe means of transport, and also to have a safe cycle paths, safe, which means that there are no conflicts with car traffic and that there are close connections with residential areas, and thus these modal filters prioritize pedestrian and car traffic and to take car traffic out of these areas. Mr. Zöhler, let's go to Bocholt. Question to you. It is rather a general question. What would you recommend to municipalities which simply say, well, we want to do more for cycling? What are your experiences? Where to start? Well, I think for those cities which really want to improve things, it is important to do more PR work. The better you explain to people that cycling is good, but that it's not only good, but it's also very important in everyday life. You can also convince people, and if you have a good quality of cycling, then it's also fun, and then people would use cycles, and PR work needs to be continued. That is the big advantage here in our region, Westmünsterland. People have done that, experienced that for many years, and they are cycling from the bottom of their hearts, and I think you can move a lot of things. Jennifer Toole, what about the administration, the authorities? What is needed from the authorities in order to bring about a successful and fast implementation?
Sorry, you faded out at the beginning of the question.
Am Anfang konnte ich Sie...
The question is, was braucht es in einer
So the question is, what do you need in an authority for a successful and fast implementation from the authorities? What is needed?
It's very important to have a person, an elected official, a champion who is a mayor or someone who can really make things happen quickly. Their support is critical, and their vision is important. The other thing that is needed is a deliberate conversation about changing how we normally would implement projects. So the usual amount of time is a long time. It takes years to get a project built. We have to think about ways to shorten that time considerably and agree on the things that we're not going to debate as we design the project. We have a strong history in the U.S. of making sure that before we finish a project, it has to be perfect. And for quick build to be successful, you can't wait for perfection. You have to move forward with something that you can get built quickly, even if you're needing to cut some corners and make some compromises.
Well, dear participants, you are cordially invited to take part with your questions. You can send them to us in the chat, and I can pass them on to our panelists and participants. I would like to know, Mr. Loakes, so obstacles and hindrances. What did you do about hindrances and obstacles? Were there any stumbling stones on your way, and what did you do with them, and how did you make sure that you were still successful?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that was in the way was a very vocal opposition to what we wanted to do and what the majority of residents wanted us to do. And even 7 years on, it's been a 7-year journey for us in Waltham Forest. There is still an element there that is fighting hard to take us back 7 years. Despite now all the growing evidence, not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but across the world, that suggests active travel, more people walking and cycling is the right thing to do, the right thing to do for our public health, our air quality, our climate. Despite the growing evidence, the fact that we're all working differently now, we don't need to commute into central city centres in the way that perhaps we did even just a year ago. The pandemic has proved that more of us can actually work from home, work in our local neighbourhoods than commute into city centres like we used to do. They fight really, really hard. We had legal challenges, judicial reviews to the schemes that we wanted to do, but we went back and we won those legal battles. We provided the political leadership for change, for radical change, not just tinkering around the edges, radical interventions that kind of got people's imaginations working. That then inspired community champions and ambassadors to take this agenda on and then have the conversations with their neighbours themselves, rather than just the council seeing to be doing to people. People were owning this agenda. And when you give them the evidence, you give them the tools, you give them the vision and what can be done, then they start to embrace it. But it's still hard, even to this day, the schemes that we're still fighting for now. It's not over. But every single scheme that we get in and we keep means we are a step closer to a better, brighter future for future generations of people in Waltham Forest, in London, across Europe, across the globe.
Mhm. Herr Hikel, vor welchen Herausforderungen standen Sie?
Mr. Hikel, what were your challenges? So what can you tell the participants here in this round? What are the things where you must not give up? So there is skepticism vis-à-vis this paradigm shift in favor of cycling and other forms of transport. It needs to be supported, but from our experience, I can say that we worked a lot with modal filters, and from civil society, we got only few objections. There were few conflicts when we introduced modal filters in order to get car traffic out of certain areas. This caused actually only a few problems, and I think this is a prerequisite for the fact that also further going actions can be taken, that one can say step by step. The main roads can be restructured, and the parking lots also need to be tackled. There's no way around that if you want to create a bicycle structure, and I think in this way successively you can create a social acceptance. So you must not really impose something on people, but you can convince people by absolutely improving the quality of transport for cyclists by using modal filters. And if more people understand what the added value is in inner city transport, it is clear this is necessary in times of climate change to support alternative means of transport, and here cycling plays an important role. We probably will not be able to get car traffic completely out of the cities. It should not be our objective either, but it should also be our objective that the cyclists and the other modes of transport should also be transported, and cycling needs to be more strongly promoted.
Ms. Casorrán, how important is it in your view to involve the civil society even in the planning phase, to keep them on board early on, to give them the feeling you can have your say, you are participants and you can co-determine this?
Yeah, that's really crucial. In the case of Poblenou Superblock, for instance, inhabitants were not well informed before the action, before the pilot, and that was a big problem. Even most of the people are not going to participate, but they want to have the chance. Anyway, if the participatory process goes afterwards, like in our case, it's also not such a big drama because people can participate. And in our case, we could ask for the municipality for our needs in our superblock, and then that was all. And people were happy with the participatory process afterwards. but yeah, it was a big deal in the beginning, just because of the low participatory process. Yeah, it's really important. And of course, when you are gonna tackle public space, you are gonna work. You are gonna change the environment, the real direct environment from neighbors. So you really need them on board. You really need to know what their needs are, what their expectations are, and so on. So it's really crucial. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Zöhler,
Mr. Zöhler, when a while ago we talked about this in our discussion round, the question arose, do we really need those so incredibly long planning phases? Why don't we get to act sooner? Just taking the example of the pop-up bikeways, wouldn't it be better to just demonstrate, yes, it's doable, and then we readjust things later? What's your turn on this in Bocholt? How do you go about this problem? Unfortunately, we cannot hear you because you have muted your microphone. Now you are up and running. Okay. Still, we cannot hear you because you are still muted. Now it should work. Yes, okay. Great. In this discussion round, we had in effect discussed whether we shouldn't have done it very early, these pop-up bikeways. Why shouldn't we take the shortcuts and just say, let's just do it? No. Bocholt is a small city, 75,000 people living together. You just don't have the huge leverage. It's a very fragmented city, so we cannot just roll out a big scheme. In the new neighborhoods, where we need to manage mobility in such a way that inside the neighborhood there is a doable way. For example, rental bikes is a good tool to make this an attractive option. So you need, for smaller cities like Bocholt, you need a different set of tools. But for large cities or metropolises, it's a huge issue. Jennifer Toole, all in all, how can one accelerate processes and simplify these administrative processes? What needs to happen so as to streamline those processes, to get to implement them faster? What are the leverages that we can use here?
Yes, there are a variety of ways to do it. It really depends on each city, because every place has a different process. So it's a matter of looking at how things are done in that city and figuring out where all the shortcuts are. And so one strategy is to develop a framework for making decisions that relies on a fewer number of people who can make the final call. And then another strategy is to develop all the mechanisms for construction from the very beginning, so that you have a set of different construction crews who are ready to implement the projects, who have experience building those sorts of designs, and that you have a streamlined process for getting them started on construction from the beginning. So some cities use their own construction crews, and that greatly shortens the amount of time. They don't have to go out to bid for each project. And they have teams of construction crews that are familiar with what they're building. And that has also helped to shorten the amount of time. And I think, we have similar issues with with the public engagement process of it taking a long time to get through that process. But it's also to the detriment of projects, because when so much time passes between a public meeting and when a project is constructed, a lot of times there are new people in the community that have not seen, did not originally participate in that public engagement. So by shortening that amount of time, people can see more immediate results from the public engagement process.
Wir haben Fragen von Ihnen bekommen und
We received questions from the audience. The first question goes to Mr. Hikel. What type of responsibility for the traffic volume is given to the landlords and to the big housing communities? Well, they do have a responsibility, because landlords and housing companies need to give proof of a certain amount of parking places. With new construction projects, our building regulation imposes a lower amount of parking spaces, because the public space are too valuable an asset to sacrifice it just for the needs of parking cars. So in new constructions, the landlords and their homeowners have an increased responsibility to compensate for this lack of parking spaces in the urban spaces. They need to provide alternative solutions, or in turn, they need to provide also safe sheltering spaces for bicycles. What about new residential quarters? How are they linked up to the public transport systems, just to provide sufficient alternatives to the private car? For example, if we have a very large surface like Berlin, we have large surfaces compared to the number of inhabitants. If you live on the periphery, you need an alternative to the private car. For example, by public transport, buses and rail. If you do not provide such alternatives, then you would have quite often those citizens who insist on using their private cars. So you have to consider alternatives right from the planning process, from day one. I think it's doable that new residential neighborhoods be planned without too much attention being paid to the private cars. So, Ms. Casorrán, my question goes to you. What about cities where citizens have not yet adopted biking, where it's not a part of everyday life, biking?
Well, then we have to really start with many different policies, because biking, it's a lot of infrastructure, but then it's also a lot of education. It's a lot of, also it has to do with rules, not with your local rules. It has to do with promoting other policies like cycle logistics. It has to do, seeing bikes in your city means a lot of different policies to really get it. The first one, it's infrastructure. So you really need to create cycle infrastructure, a safe one. You have to think of all ages, from 8-year-old that can cycle, of course, from themselves, not alone. But when they are 12, they really would have to cycle by themselves if we consider a safe infrastructure. And we also need infrastructure for elder people, for people that are not used to cycle. So we need to really combine segregated infrastructure with low speed streets. But the biggest challenge now is controlling these low speed areas, because many of our cities have now 30 kilometers per hour. In Spain, in 6 months, all the streets with only one lane will be already 30 kilometers per hour by law. But we really need to make sure that this speed is being accomplished, because else cyclists will not feel safe, cyclists will disturb pedestrians. But it's not only infrastructure, it's many things.
An Sie konkret, Frau Casorrán, geht auch die Frage von Lukas Hikel.
The next question goes to you again, Ms. Casorrán. What about the realization of the 503 superblocks in Barcelona? What's the latest state of affairs? Could you also explain once again, how did you go about the elimination of parking spaces? What about the resistance that you certainly have met with?
Yeah, well, the 500 super blocks, that was the mobility plan, the previous one. Now there's one new coming, and it's more focused on access. I mean, we are changing the focus from the small area, from the super block, to really create access, which in the end it's one super block next to each other. Now we've got maybe, I don't know, it's less than 10 super blocks, because there are 2 in our neighborhood. But there are some more coming with this view from access. So it's been changing. So I think we will talk about access and not about super blocks in the future, because now we consider Barcelona as a super block by itself. About parking, as I said, in the Poblenou super block, the car park was free, totally free. So people that was coming also to work in this area, they were using this car parking for free. But after the super block, it was regulated, so it wasn't free anymore. It was for inhabitants mainly. So people had to change their way of moving. I mean, Barcelona is not a car parking lot. And if you want to come by car, then you really need to pay for it. I mean, car parking has been removed in some parts, but there is still some other places. So it's not such a big drama. I mean, we had now in the front side at the sea, by the sea, we had like 1,000 places for free totally, and now they are removed. And there's no problem at all. I mean, people understand that free car park, it's not equal. It's not something cities can resist anymore. So it's the normal way to work with sustainable mobility in cities.
Wir haben eine Frage von Christian W.
There's a question raised by Christian Wegener that I would pass on to you, Mr. Zöhler. What about the experiences of cities and municipalities upon tolls for motor-driven traffic? How do people react? Well, in Bocholt, we do not demonize the car transport or car traffic. We try to reconcile the various modalities of transport within our road network. The only thing is we want to continue promoting the bicycle traffic. We have 39% in the modal split for the bicycle and 10% for walking or pedestrians. So half of all the ways or all the trips are done in an environmentally friendly way. So those who want to drive by car still use the car. We have so many customers also from the Netherlands. Although the Dutch are huge bike fans, many of them still come to Bocholt by car. So the underground garages will be preserved. So it's a sort of split or dilemma in which we are. We need to cater for the needs of our guests, international guests. So we have parking houses close to downtown, while the Bocholt residents are supposed to use increasingly the bike. So most local residents effectively use their bikes while the tourists come by car. Mr. Loakes, one question that I would like to pass on to you. Question is, do you have any incentives or promotion for people who want to get away from their own car? Do you have incentives? Mr. Loakes?
I think the biggest incentive for us is to have cleaner air for our children and for all of us to breathe. I think the biggest incentive is to have calmer streets, more successful shops in former shopping parades that were literally dying because they were being choked by the endless amounts of cars passing by them, which meant no one could get to them. I think the incentive is to be able to plant more trees in our streets, to plant more planting for biodiversity, to contribute to addressing the climate emergency. I think community cohesion, greater community cohesion, because people are allowed to meet informally and formally, just as they're walking to school or walking to the shops in a way that they couldn't do that before. They're the incentives. They're the real incentives. And I think too often we get dragged back to this kind of very monetary-based incentivization, where actually the reality is there are so many softer things that we can be benefiting from and are the real incentives. I mean, who would not want to live in a residential street where 2,500 vehicles a day are no longer going past their front door? Who would not want to listen to the birds singing in the streets and be able to have a casual conversation with someone as you walk to school with your young children, rather than have to shout and bellow across the roar of motor traffic? Who wouldn't want to just pop into a local shop because it is now thriving and it can put tables outside on the pavement reclaimed from the road because there isn't that through traffic there anymore? So there, for me, are the real incentives: health and well-being, community cohesion, improved economic viability of our really threatened small shopping parades and town centres. On top of that, though, of course, we do free bike hire, free cargo bike hire, free cycle training. We do all of those things on top of it. But let's stick to what the real hardcore benefits are, and that is a better place, a transformed place for all of us to live, work and play.
Jennifer Toole,
Jennifer Toole, are there any good conceptual approaches in terms of commuting? What should be kept in mind, and what would you say are good role models, which are good examples?
Let me just clarify the question. Are you talking at the commute trip to and from work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So here in the U.S., we have focused on, we call it first and final mile projects. So getting commuters to transit stations and broadening the catchment area of a transit station so that more people can reach that transit station. And so one of the strategies has been to make the area around the transit station very bike friendly, provide separated places for people to bike to get to the transit station, and then at the transit station providing high volume bicycle storage, secure storage, often structures where you can use a card to get in and out so that your bike is safe while you are commuting on the train to work. So that's certainly one strategy that has been effective and has also had the impact of supporting better transit. And then there are a variety of other incentives that we have seen here in the U.S. Companies like mine that we give a very small financial gift to people who bike and walk to and from work. We're seeing more employers doing things like that, providing ways for people once they get to the office to shower and to have a place to keep their clothes for the week, for example. They bring their clothes in on Monday and bike back and forth to the office. So providing lockers for workers and other ways to make sure that if they get to work, especially during the summer months when it's hot, that they can then quickly freshen up and get busy. A lot of our commute trips are longer trips, so we're also focusing on the non-commute trips because those are often shorter trips that can be captured by bicycle. And so making sure that there is bike parking at grocery stores and other common places that people go to in their neighborhoods is another strategy. Because those are many more trips than commute trips, especially now because of COVID. People are working from home and want to stay in their neighborhood. So we're focusing quite a bit on other trips as well.
Herr Hikel, wie sieht es?
Very good. So, what is the role of commuter transport and the connection of the rural and urban areas? Is that also of importance? So, only to a limited extent, but our district and our borough in Berlin is so big that we cannot imagine that all the rides can be done by bicycle or on foot, but that is due to the size of our city and our district. Currently, there are people who have to cross this city. If you go from the east to the west by S-Bahn or by train, so it takes you an hour, and of course you cannot go that distance by bicycle just like that. So the question is, what does mobility change mean in Berlin, in cities like Berlin? So cycling is one module, but local public transport is another very important element. In times of COVID, the means of local transport are very crowded. People get very close to each other. This is unpleasant to people. Some even feel that they are at risk, and therefore we do also have a great need to take action and to invest into public transport, local public transport. So there are three pillars: cycling, pedestrian ways, and local public transport. And these are the elements that would lead to a shift from motorists to other means of transport. Mr. Zöhler, might be of particular interest to smaller municipalities. There are initiatives to offer car sharing options as part of mobile stations and mobility. Does that play a certain role in Bocholt or in your region? At least we try to establish car sharing more, but as we are a small city and we are away from bigger cities about 30 minutes, or from the airport 60 minutes, we are away from them, and therefore we do try to open up car sharing spaces, but it is difficult to find a good balance between saving parking lots in the city, but then to have people owning more than one vehicle. And therefore, actually, we need investors that can help us with convincing people, well, if you have car sharing options early in your city, then you will save space and money. But who is the driver of car sharing? Here at Borough or at a neighborhood level, it's a good level. So if you have about 200 flats, there might be one operator trying to manage that. My colleague from Berlin, who has one car sharing model after the next in his city, he knows that it is very difficult to transfer that to a small city like Bocholt, because car sharing means that you often go from A to B, and we do not have that frequent transports here in Bocholt. Now, a final question, final round, particularly with our panelists from abroad, because there's also the question, how can politicians and authorities be convinced of a better cycling policy? And this brings us back to our voting round, where many of the participants said we need much more political will and determination. Mrs. Casorrán, what would you say? How can politicians be convinced to focus more on cyclists and on an improved cycling policy?
Well, I guess politicians need, first of all, getting to know the data. It's very important. For instance, in Barcelona metropolitan area, we know that 93% of trips, of commuting trips, are under 10 kilometers. So that means all these potential trips may be for cycle. So, of course, we also know everything that Clyde mentioned before. No, it's about climate emergency. It's about health emergency. Cycling is active mobility. It's something that is only walking and cycling. No other mode of transportation is giving us this active mobility. It's about noise. Our cities are very noisy, especially Barcelona is really noisy. That's also mental health. It's about occupancy, space occupancy. I mean, cars, even when they are electric, they still occupy. It's about accidents. There are many people injured every year. In Barcelona, we got a boy of 5-year-old that was killed 1 year ago. And that's why also we are working very hard to protect the schools, no? the environment for the schools. But politicians must really get to know. I mean, only 20% of people in Barcelona are driving a car to move, no? in the city. So most of the people are pedestrians. I mean, the potential of cycling is so high. I mean, cycling is the fastest way of transportation. I'm cycling 10 kilometers to my job, and it's 40 minutes. That's for sure. And I know at the time when I'm leaving from the door, I know the time in reaching my office. That's not possible to know with any other way of transportation. So I think it's a question of getting to know all this data, and of course fighting for a better quality of life of your citizens.
Herr Loakes, auch an Sie die Frage, wie
Mr. Loakes, question to you. What is your experience? How can politicians be convinced to do a better cycling policy?
Well, speaking as a politician, just a humble local politician, I must add, it's about, for me, it's about why I came into politics. I came into politics, it's a cliche, I know, to make a difference, to change things for the better. And ultimately, with all the evidence that exists, and that evidence builds day upon day upon day, this agenda, is the right agenda to affect significant change on health, on the climate emergency, on our air quality, on community cohesion, on the economic viability of our town centres. I know I've said these things before, but they are really, really important. When we went into our projects in Waltham Forest some 6 years ago, we went into it purely as a highways and transport project. But of course, it soon became so much more. The ability to affect change and transform neighbourhoods soon became a very real reality when the feedback coming back to us wasn't necessarily about I'm cycling or walking more every day. It was about thank you for those trees in that street, because you've reclaimed road space that makes the pavement wider. Thank you for allowing me to listen to the birds sing in the trees. Thank you for helping that business down the road stay open when it was threatened with closure because of the challenges of the World Wide Web and internet shopping. You know, all of those things. I came into politics to make a difference, to change. And that's what you can do by grasping this agenda. But if you don't believe me, look up Waltham Forest, Mini Holland. Come to Walthamstow, come to Leighton, come to Leytonstone, all those places in Waltham Forest, and I'll take you around, as I did with Melissa. And you will see the difference, the positivity that can be achieved when all we are really doing is simply putting the role of the motor car back in its box, putting it on a level playing field with other modes of transportation. That's ultimately what we're doing. We're not car haters. We recognise there will always be a need for some access to the motor car, but we're putting it back on a level playing field, and we're giving other modes of transportation, walking and cycling, those that have zero impact on the environment, a chance to have the infrastructure that matches the fact that they have zero impact on the environment, the safety and the priority that means more people will embrace walking and cycling, particularly for those short journeys around their immediate neighbourhoods, towns and cities. Going to politics, you're going to make a difference, not to manage the status quo. If you want to make a difference on this agenda, then embrace walking, cycling, active travel, embrace transforming your neighbourhoods.
Damit bedanke ich mich ganz herzlich bei allen Gesprächsteilnehmern.
So I thank all the panelists for having answered questions. These were very motivating words, particularly at the end of our discussion. Best regards to from Berlin to all parts of the world. Thank you for having taken part.